Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Season 8, Episode 6, and today I'm going to have on the program screenwriter Aleksandra Crapanzano. She is a James Beard Award-winning writer and dessert columnist for the Wall Street Journal. She has a new cookbook out right now called Gateau, A Surprising Simplicity in French Cakes. Now, I want to tell you, when I took this book out of the box, when I originally got it, I was just immediately wowed by the artwork by Cassandre Mortorol, and it's just amazing. It just really pops. I mean, I've really, read some great cookbooks that had some amazing food photography in them, and I've loved those. But this artwork is just spectacular and really will knock your socks off. If you like to bake and you like French baking, you're going to really love this book. And I just think if for any home baker that wants to have some nice things for your family to cook that are simple and elegant, this cookbook is a must for you. Don't be put off by the name, French. Don't let that make you think that it is hard or complex or difficult. This is all stuff that's easy for you to do. And Aleksandra really went out of her way to make this simple. And the food writing in it is excellent. She really does a lot of step-by-step guides for the common cook and makes it easy for you. I joke cooking around and said that I, a little bit imitated by doing Madeleines, and I still am a little bit, but honestly, this book makes me want to try it. So on that note, I want to go ahead and go to the conversation, which was just wonderful. Just enjoyed talking to her. She was such, just a font of information and just lovely to talk to. So onward we go to my conversation with Aleksandra Crapanzano, talking about her newest book, Gateau, The Surprising Simplicity of French Cakes, out today. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I am very honored to have on this program Aleksandra Crapanzano, who is a James Beard Award-winning writer and dessert columnist for the Wall Street Journal. She is the author of The London Cookbook and Eat Cook LA, and her work has been widely anthologized, mostly notably in the Best American Food Writing. Her new book, Gateau, The Surprising Simplicity of French Cakes, is out as of this episode airing. Aleksandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Dean.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with your work, can you tell them a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I mean, I have been writing about desserts for the last 12 years for the Wall Street Journal. I've written a couple cookbooks, but in this particular book, Gateau, I really wanted to return to my childhood in France. I moved to Paris when I was 10 years old and fell in love completely with food. But I also really spent a lot of time inside the homes of Parisians. And so when I, even as a dessert writer, when I consider what we think about when we think about French desserts, it really is patisserie. And it occurred to me that nobody has really done a book on what the French actually do bake at home, because they don't go to a patisserie every day. And they also are not born, with a genetic superpower teaching them how to, make extraordinarily fancy desserts. Really, I wanted to demystify that, but also, definitely have my cake and eat it too. I mean, in that they do know what they're doing. And yeah. I hope to convey that.
It's funny. I just talked about your book with Flavor, a person who does flavors for a living. His name is Emmanuel LaRoche, and he basically works in the flavor industry. And we're talking about the differences. I'm sorry to jump to this right away, but I was really enamored of the flavor profiles in your cookbook, as opposed to American, which tends to be chocolate or vanilla and vanilla. So, or now we have pumpkin spice everything. So there's that. But in your cookbook, I was so excited to see the different flavor profiles of citrus, almond, violet, rose, not violet, sorry, lavender.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
Yes, orange blossom. Yeah, there are a ton. And I think, I would say two things about that really, really struck me in writing this book, because in a way, when when you cook something all of your life, or at least your many, many years, you kind of stop to actually analyze what it is that you're doing. And, but what when you start writing it down, of course, you actually have to articulate that in a different way, which is a process I love. And one of the things that really struck me was when I am baking French desserts, French cakes, I really do not reach for vanilla very often. And if I'm baking with apples, I rarely reach for cinnamon. It really is that they are. The French love to put forward whatever it is that is their main ingredient. And so they don't want to mask it either with a lot of sugar or with that kind of immediate sensation of, okay, this is vanilla or this is cinnamon apple. It's that kind of so familiar a flavor actually that you don't really read what that particular cake is about.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I definitely wanted this book to be about was, but that the French really do work on kind of perfecting a kind of a series of back pocket recipes, right? And those recipes are easy. Some of them are learned in maternelle, which is nursery school, like the yogurt cakes and their version of a pound cake, and some of the nut torts. And I mean, they're, a kind of creme fraiche berry cake in the summer that can also be adapted for every single season. So really, the thing I so wanted to do was say, get these core recipes so entrenched that they're almost muscle memory, right? And that can happen super fast. And then you can just experiment. You can riff. You can add whatever flavors you want, whatever nuts, chocolate chips. You can go savory. You can go sweet. You can add liquors. You can add floral waters. There's so much you can do.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for the cookbook, because I grew up in the suburbs, and I've eaten most of my life these crappy airy cakes that are made out of cake mix boxes and have ridiculous amounts of frosting on them.
Yeah.
And I remember just reaching a point in my life, even yet when I was young, like I'd rather be stabbed in the eye than eat another one of these crappy, And when I got to, when I was older and I got to go to bakeries and stuff abroad, I was like, wow, pastry actually can be really good. There can be some really good cakes, actually.
And and I think this is in no way meant to be a health conscious book, but I think one of the things that the French have figured out is that if they want a little something sweet every single night, which they kind of do, and so do I, then it really can't be over the top, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be truly a little taste of something, and it also needs to be not, overloaded with icing and powdered sugar all over the place. It needs to be something that gives you that little bit of satisfaction that you want without being over the top.
You have a really wide range of stuff here, though. The book has many different types of baking in it, and there are some really great cake recipes, and I really was in love with many of them. I thought they really ranged, though. There wasn't like any kind of one size fits all. I felt there were some really nice little homemade cakes that were very simple to make. In fact, I think everything in here is nothing in here is really like overly complicated. Everything is simple, which you say in the title. And I really like that, because everything seems accessible. I mean, I know it's French and it says, French cakes, but it doesn't mean that it's foreign or unusual. Everything in here is something we could all do at home easily, I think. And I really wanted to thank you for that, because I looked at everything in this book and I was like, I could do all these things. I could make these things. Although I'm still a little bit intimidated by the Madeleines a little bit.
Oh, it's so easy. So listen, you could actually, no, I mean, this book takes zero experience. I mean, people don't believe me at first when they hear French cake, and they know that I write about desserts. So the assumption is that it's easy. I think it's easy because that's what I do. But in point of fact, these are really family recipes. They're recipes that, I have seen kids make. I have seen people make while multitasking and doing, 3 other things when they come home. I mean, particularly in the early chapters, I would say, and Madeleine are super, super easy. So the thing I love about Madeleine is that there's a great wow factor when you present warm Madeleine to people, right? I mean, it is a transcendent, I hate to riff on the whole Proustian moment thing, but it truly is a transcendent thing to have a Madeleine that is just hot out of the oven, because it is so tender and beautiful. And I think what I learned in making them and having them at people's houses is that you make the batter in advance, because it has to sit in the fridge anyway. And if you batter takes 10 minutes. If you put the batter into the Madeleine tins and then stick those tins into the fridge, then you can have a dinner party, and at some point you just preheat the oven, and 10 minutes before you want to serve dessert, you put these things in the oven and they come out and they're ready to go. And I mean, people literally kind of close their eyes and get quiet. It's a very, and again, it's that great kind of savoir faire that you don't need to go to elaborate lengths. You need a really good recipe that you are confident in and allows you not to have to fuss or stress or try something you've never made before. Like I really have never seen somebody at home in France have people over to dinner and try a recipe from a new book that they've never made before that they've spent all day on.
Yeah.
I mean, they think that's insane. And sure, it's fun to do once in a while at home with your family, but the whole point of kind of just the having that ease to have people over and enjoy yourself as well is really that you're not trying to be a professional. You're trying to be a phenomenal home cook, and it's really different.
I wanted to make one of the recipes before I got a chance to talk to you. So I made the lemon thyme yogurt cake because it had all those
was it good?
items. Yeah, I really loved it. I thought this is something I could really have, and my family liked it too. So that was important for me because I think I'm like, I could make this again and they would love it again. So I could see that becoming a part of my repertoire. What are some of the go-to cakes that you like to make time and again from your cookbook?
Oh, so the first chapter, which is a lot of yogurt cakes, I mean, and it includes an almond yogurt cake, and this being 2022, a oat milk yogurt cake.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is actually just great, and you realize that oat yogurt actually has a kind of rich depth to it that really works. I love those cakes because you can serve them completely plain. They take, they're taught in nursery school. They're very easy, but you can also dress them up. So you can do a little Gourmet soaking syrup. You can do a little bit of a glaze. You can add some lavender. You can add all sorts of things to them too. Depending on what else you're serving and who you're serving to. So for example, my son is now 16. So he's definitely not 21, but a tiny bit of Gourmet and a glaze isn't going to hurt him. But
right.
But when he was younger, I would sometimes just cut a yogurt cake in half, and I would add a kind of boozy glaze for grown-ups and give him the other one, right? I mean, it's great. These things are very, very adaptable. I also really like what's called translates as the 4/4 cake, and it's really their version of a pound cake.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant, brilliant recipe. It's totally foolproof because what the French often do is they will coat the flour in melted butter. So instead of that first step where you cream butter and sugar together, and then you're adding eggs and you're adding all sorts of things before you're actually, let me rephrase that for a second.
That's fine. We can do that.
Because it's a little bit complicated. One of the recipes I really love is what translates as the 4/4 cake, and that is their version of a pound cake. And what they historically did, instead of doing kind of 1 pound of each ingredient the way we do, is the unknown was always the eggs. You never knew how many eggs you were going to have. So they would weigh the eggs in their shell, and then they would match that with the other 3 ingredients. And so it's a slightly different approach. But then the other thing that they would do is, and this is really eliminates the possibility even of forming gluten, because what they will do is they will coat the flour in melted butter before adding it to the eggs. Now, egg whites are 80 to 85% water. And when you mix water and flour, you get gluten, and then you run the risk of a tough cake instead of having a tender crumb cake. And by first coating the flour in the fat of the melted butter, you completely avoid that problem. And so, you can have a kid make this and they can stir and stir and stir and it won't get tough. So it's a great recipe, and it's moist. There's also a couple creme fraiche cakes in this, again, super, super moist. Some of the cakes, like the nut cakes, I make those quite a bit because, we all have so many gluten-free or gluten intolerant, gluten sensitive friends right now that have to have those recipes. And I don't even call them gluten-free because the French really don't refer to them as gluten-free. They just refer to them as nut torts. And it's kind of understood that that they don't have flour because they don't need flour, not because of any other reason. Those are great. And then I have to say, I mean, obviously I make a lot of these so often. I make the Gateau Suzy, which is a great, great chocolate cake. I mean, it's like the little black dress of cakes. And I make a lot of savory cakes.
I really liked that you had that because I was surprised by that. And I thought, wow, some of these would be really great to serve to guests, like when they have friends over and stuff. They're really brilliant. Do you want to talk about some of these recipes?
I do, because I think they're relatively unknown. I know Dora Greenspan, who I adore, has written about them a little bit, and my friend Melissa Clark too. But basically they're when I say cake in this case, I'm really talking about a quick bread. So in this case, this is a kind of a savory quick bread that is everything that you want in a sandwich in one loaf. So you take, if you want to do a croque monsieur cake, right, which is essentially a great ham and melted cheese sandwich. You add the ham to the butter, you add the Gruyere to the butter, maybe you add some chives or some leeks or something to give it a little bite. If you want the equivalent of kind of a caprese panini, again, Italian, but the French are so aligned with the Italian Mediterranean. You're really taking tomatoes, mozzarella, and basil and putting that in a batter and some olive oil. And what you get are these incredibly moist cakes that are very, very practical because you can cut them into little pieces and you can serve them with an aperitif if you have friends coming over. And then you can put a couple slices in your lunchbox the next day. Or you can, have them if you're going out, you're going to the theater, you're going to a movie, you think you're going to come back at 11 at night, you're going to be hungry. You can prep that and make that in advance, serve it with a salad, it'll stay moist. Even by the third or fourth day, honestly, you can pop a piece in the toaster. And, and the French love basic sandwiches, right? They do that baguette where you cut a baguette in half and you add butter and you add some ham or some cheese or some pate. But in America, when we have sandwiches, they're not at the optimal time, right? Sometimes they've been in the fridge too long, or they've been sitting at room temperature too long. They're either kind of too soggy or too cold, or they've lost their texture. And so this is like the perfect lunchbox sandwich. And you can stick vegetables and protein in there and all the things that you need to do too.
That the savory cakes would be so wonderful for a picnic too. So I want to recommend that to anybody who's listening, because I really think they should check that part of the cookbook out as well, because it's phenomenal. And I really can't wait to try them myself for that very purpose. I really like the different flavoring pairings that we've mentioned ahead already in the cookbook, because I saw some that I hadn't thought of before. And I really loved the usage of coffee flavoring, of citrus, and then also I love the chocolate and pear flavorings that I saw a few times in the book. Do you have any favorite flavor pairings from the book?
It's so funny you mentioned chocolate and pear, because that is actually, I would say, one of my all-time favorite combinations. Part of it is that my mother always would add a little bit of Poire William to Julia Child's chocolate mousse, which was one of my all-time favorite desserts growing up, and still is. And really, because pear is that magical fruit it's got a lot of delicate fragrance to it. And it will never overpower what it's with, which I like. So you're almost bringing out a kind of faint floral perfume to a chocolate, which is lovely. And it still reads as super chocolatey, but you're getting something that has a little bit of delicacy in the background that I think is just delicious. And, and one of the things about, chocolate mousse, for example, is chocolate mousse is that kind of funny oxymoron where it's supposed to be unbelievably rich and dense, but it's also supposed to be light and ethereal at the same time, right? You want to taste it, and you want to taste that incredibly rich flavor, but not bite. And to me, pear is one of the perfect matches for that, because again, it's got a beautiful fragrance, beautiful that you taste. I mean, you really do taste the pear fragrance. But again, it feels a little bit ethereal. It feels a little bit, a little delicate in a nice way. that helps create certain kind of the sensation of something being a little bit delicate in a mousse or a chocolate cake. So that is one of my favorite combinations. I also, I love lavender and lemon.
Yes.
And in the summer, I will take lemon and rind. I will take the zest of lemon and I will take tons and tons of lavender, fresh lavender, and I'll dry it out for maybe a day in the sun. And then I'll put it in the food processor with some raw sugar until I get a nice blend. And then I can use that really all winter long, so that I have that kind of that lavender lemon already. And again, if I have a little jar of that in the pantry, then I can make a yogurt cake, I can make a 4/4 cake, I can make any of these cakes and suddenly get that really beautiful fragrance. I also love rose water and orange blossom water. And one thing that's true in France is that there's less. I get in America, I feel like you see rose water really being served in Mother's Day parties or baby showers or things like that. It is considered usually a very feminine flavor profile. In France, it's really not at all. So it is. There's no, it would be served at any sort of dinner party or just for fun. And you go to any patisserie and you'll see lots of rose macaroons.
We can't talk about the cookbook without talking about the beautiful artwork by Cassandra Mortorial. Can you talk about her work in the book and how you got connected with her to do the artwork?
Absolutely. I was really looking for an illustrator and knew I wanted somebody in France who was familiar with these cakes, and that we would kind of have an easy code language for them. And a friend recommended her, and we hit it off immediately. I looked on her website and I saw some really beautiful work, and I thought, this is exactly what I want. The reason I wanted it illustrated is that I want this book to be timeless, because the recipes really are timeless. This is, my last 2 books were photographed, and they really do represent a moment in time, and the recipes should live on, but their recipes, they're books about cities. I wrote the London Cookbook and Eat Cook LA, and so they very much are meant to reflect the vibrancy of those cities at a particular moment. A book that has recipes that date back to the Middle Ages, that has recipes that have been around, even if not back to the Middle Ages, for 100, 200 years. They're tried, they're true. Obviously, I should say, I use a convection oven and a stand mixer, and there, baking powder and all sorts of things that weren't around then. But they're basically really, really tried and true. And so I want this to be a book that lasts on people's shelves for a very, very long time. And I felt that food photography can sometimes feel a little tired very, very quickly. I did not want that. I also wanted people to just feel a little bit breezy, in a good way, to just realize this is meant to be fun and lighthearted. And to me, watercolors do that. They have a kind of a joyous quality that I wanted. She definitely went a little fancier than the actual recipes in the book at times, just because, of course, if you're an artist, you gotta do that. Why not, particularly in the cover? But the reality is like, how many photographs or illustrations of a loaf cake can you have? I mean, they all look a little bit different, but they're not going to be radically different. So I also didn't feel I needed to have this book photographed. I wanted instead to just give a sense of ease and joy to it.
I mean, no amount of food photography, I mean, as good as it can be, it would not have been as beautiful as the artwork in this book. And when I took it out of the box, I remember going, wow, it just pops. It immediately arrests your attention. I mean, I'm sure when you first saw the galleys and everything, you must have been like, holy crap, this is amazing.
Yes. I mean, we had worked by that point, we had really, really gone back and forth a lot. And she was just amazing to work with, because we could say something like, my editor and I, when I say we want a kind of a fanciful scene in Paris, that with somebody having cake, but that's basically, those are the confines. And, and she would come up with this fantastic approach. And I love that. So it does. I hope I work with her again. I think she is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, you mean you're really, you hit it on the head when you said this book is timeless because of this, because this is one of these things that 20, 30 years from now, the book's still going to be beautiful. It's still going to really resonate with people. So you really did a great job there.
Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. I want to go back to your beginning as a writer. Now, you had done some screenwriting in Los Angeles and Hollywood back before you started doing food writing. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually, it's a funny story. I went to graduate school in film directing at NYU, and my kind of thesis screenplay took place in 1848. It was too expensive to make as a person just leaving school, but it did get me an agent at CAA, and I worked for a couple of, I guess, actually quite a few years writing for what was then a really interesting kind of independent, pseudo-independent film world, the kind of the days of Miramax and Focus Features and Fine Line and Fox Searchlight. And but I also worked a lot in the UK. And so I was back and forth to London quite often. And in fact, really love that film industry. It's a little bit smaller. It's a very gentle one compared to Hollywood. And then when my son was born in 2006, I knew I wanted to take off a little bit of time. And in 2007, there was a Writers Guild strike, which meant that if you wrote for Hollywood, you had to stop literally writing for Hollywood.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I had an article I wanted to write about food, and I literally emailed Amanda Hesser. So Amanda Hesser at that point was the food editor of the New York Times Magazine Food Pages. And I said, I have this story I want to write. And she said, go for it and give it a try. And she liked it. And that really began almost 2 years of doing that column. And, it worked with having a young child for me. It was something I loved. And I also believe that writing is a muscle. And I think if you don't write, it's much harder to write. And so I wanted to keep that alive. I knew I was going to write, but I wasn't going to go back and forth to Los Angeles or New York. And it's also just been a passion. I mean, I've always, my money job in film school was producing for Martha Stewart. And so I've always, so all the things that I've kind of done have had food somehow in them.
Yeah.
I'm now writing a movie about wine in Bordeaux. That's a love story and deals with climate.
Oh, wait a minute. Is that based on a book that?
Nope.
Okay, then never mind. I thought of something else. So sorry.
Nope, but there's some really good books on that. But and anyway, so kind of what my side thing was really started to become my main thing over time. And, at a certain point in writing my Wall Street, well, I should backtrack and say that, after the New York Times, I left because Ruth Reichel hired me over to Gourmet before it shuttered, and I won a James Beard Award then. And then when Gourmet shuttered, which was terribly sad, the Wall Street Journal was just about to start off duty, their first lifestyle section. And they called me up and said, would you come write a food column? And it was really while I was writing that book that column that I realized I was writing more and more about what was happening in the UK and how it was kind of undergoing a real culinary transformation as a city that had always had terrible food was suddenly having extraordinary food. And I wanted to document that. And then I realized that was also happening in Los Angeles. Again, a city that was not known for food was suddenly kind of having this extraordinary food renaissance. And so I wrote a book about that. And and gradually it started to, it kind of, the food writing just grew and grew and grew. And then this book is probably my most personal and most important, because I started it in the beginning of the pandemic. I thought it was going to be 70 pages. I thought it was going to be, a little gift book, and with, maybe 50 cake recipes. And I would do, perfect one every day of the pandemic. And then the pandemic grew and the book grew and suddenly, I would had, 250 cakes. And I started to realize at that point, wait a second, this actually should be a kind of definitive book. And I don't like to use that word because it feels incredibly arrogant, but the way that I mean it is that I wanted to get all the categories in. I wanted to make sure that we had bouche de Noël that somebody at home could make. I wanted to make sure that all of the major cakes were covered that people make at home. And but it was really my way of writing my way home to Paris, I think, when I couldn't get there. So the borders were closed, but I would kind of live in that headspace, and we would eat in that headspace.
You had mentioned Gourmet magazine. You were one of the last writers there when it closed. That must have been devastating. I've read a lot of that Ruth Reichel wrote about it. What was that like for you then?
It was such a shock. I mean, I was in the last issue, and Ruth was an extraordinary mentor and editor, still is. And she really believed that food writing needed a place and it needed length, and that it didn't have to be super trendy. I mean, in the way that William Shawn, who was my mother's first editor at the New Yorker magazine, legendary editor-in-chief there for 50 some years, he did have a sense of, go figure out this story, write it, figure it out, take some time with it. And that's just an incredible gift to have. There are not a lot of places where one can write essays about food anymore. I mean, there are almost no places. And so I really miss it. And I know that everybody who really believed that food writing could be literary and evocative and nuanced and poetic and all of these things really, really miss it. I thought it was a massive mistake on the board of Condé Nast, and I think that's been recognized.
Yeah.
And, because it was a cost-cutting thing. But it could come back. Who knows? Some version
Hopefully.
of it. Now people can write more online, which is wonderful. It's just that you absolutely cannot make a living doing it. And I think that when you're writing online, it's both freeing, but it is you're not necessarily putting in quite the same time commitment and sense of awareness of permanence that you are when you're writing to publish in paper. And the way I always think of it is that when I was in film school, even though everybody was starting to shoot video or was already shooting video, essentially, not iPhones yet, but video, we were originally taught on 16 millimeter. And the idea was, if you're going to take this seriously as an art, then you need to know that every shot matters. And it's not just something you kind of do over 1,000 times. You need to think about it and then do it and do it right. And I think that training is really important as a writer as well. That you need to at least, even if you are going to write in a digital medium, you need to somehow think, okay, every sentence matters.
Your first book, Eat Cook LA, Recipes from the City of Los Angeles, was kind of a groundbreaking book that you took 100 recipes from famous restaurants in LA and you retooled them for the home cook. Where did you think of this idea, and how did you begin to work with these chefs on this project?
So Eat Cook LA was actually my second book.
I'm sorry, apologies.
Don't worry. But both Eat Cook LA and the London Cookbook, which was my first book, really were sprung from a desire to really celebrate these cities that were suddenly turning into extraordinary food cities. And even more particularly, when I kind of, just as a journalist, dug a little bit deeper into what was causing that change, what I realized was that there were a few chefs who happened to be extraordinary teachers, very generous teachers, who were at the heart really of these incredible culinary transformations in both cities. So in London, that's Fergus Henderson, and uh, Rose Gray and Ruthie Rogers of the River Cafe, who I think of as one because it was their restaurant, but basically those two restaurant kitchens and those extraordinary three people managed to train an entire city worth of unbelievable chefs, who then trained another group and really created a sense of generosity and solidarity, in which you wanted everybody to make great food. It was not a competitive. It doesn't, it's the opposite of those Marco Pierre White cocaine fueled, testosterone fueled, crazy fight era, that had existed previously. And I mean, Jamie Oliver, right, came out of the River Cafe, and then
Yeah.
he obviously launched a whole other group of chefs, and now you're actually into a fourth generation of that. And in LA, it was really Nancy Silverton and Suzanne Gone, who I felt again were very, very instrumental in not only training people, but creating the sense in the city among people in food that there was room for everybody. Instead of being competitive, it was to learn from each other. And I think it transformed the city entirely. So those, that was it. And then, I find, listen, people always say, well, do chefs really want to part with their recipes? How do you get them to do that? Are they really giving you the correct one? And, the answer is, I would say 99.9% of the time, it's really easy because chefs are, the good ones at least, are cooking from seasonal ingredients, whatever happens to be available and fantastic at that particular moment. And I think if they're really good, they're very, very flexible. I'm not talking about places like the French Laundry where, there are signature dishes that people travel,
Yeah.
Across the world for. But in these books, which are also very much about food for home cooks, there's an improvisational quality to cooking.
Yeah.
And the good chefs know that they're worth more than one recipe. They've got a lot of recipes. So that was not hard. I think what was challenging in both of those, and I had a great intern, thank God, but was that, when the life of a chef is so super, super busy, that they would absolutely say, yes, I would absolutely love to contribute. This is fantastic that you're doing this. Thank you for celebrating our city. Let me know what you want. And they would really, really mean it. But by the time they got to writing down their recipe, the chances are it was 2 a.m. and they've been working all night and they were exhausted. So I would have to go back and kind of figure out, okay, what were they too tired to not put down or leave out? And they were all great about it. I mean, as I said, there's only really been 2 experiences where I've, one chef who gave me a bad recipe and even admitted it, which was very strange. And of course I cut that. And then another very famous chef in LA who just makes so much money on particular dishes that he wasn't gonna do anything that gave away his secrets. But generally it's people, people they love it when you celebrate them.
Yeah. And I don't know, I just really loved that you're able to take some of that work that we usually think of as unattainable and make it something that we could cook at home and kind of inspire us. So I thought that was really beautiful. I really love the London cookbook, and I especially liked the part about with Fergus Henderson in it, who's like a god to me. What was it like meeting him and eating at St. John?
Oh, it was absolute heaven. I have to say, I just adored him from the moment I met him. I arrived to meet him at 11 a.m. and there he was already with a glass of champagne. Right, all dressed up, standing by the bar, and And I was thinking, this is such an important interview. I've got my, I'm ready to record. I've got my steno pad and my, I'm like ready to be super serious. And he was so delightful. And we really did spend what must have been, I don't know, 6 hours that first lunch. I mean,
Wow.
we had every sort of food and every sort of alcohol and just an incredible time. And I feel immense tenderness towards him. He's obviously spent much of his life in serious medical infirmity,
Yeah.
but he has just an incredible joy and a sense of just a love of living well that maybe in part stems from that realization that life isn't always forever. So you do want to you really want to enjoy it while you have it. The other thing that really struck me about Fergus is he had started as an architect and
Wow.
he wanted to pare down what was perceived of as a good restaurant in London, so that really until 35 years ago, I mean, not that long ago, if you wanted to go out to a fancy dinner in London, you would go to the Saveur, you would go to a hotel, you would go somewhere and have very stuffy French food that might be delicious, but it was very, very formal. Or you would do the opposite. You would go to, a pub, a chop house, a curry house, and have really good food, but it would be, it wouldn't be in any way formal or chic or a place that you necessarily want to linger at, right? And and I think Fergus, in his way of kind of just creating a space that was white walls, and he was the first to do that, and wood tables, but to have the service be impeccable and the food be impeccable was brilliant, because it became a place you wanted to go to, and you recognize that you could actually have fun and eat really well too, which sounds like it should be an obvious thing, but wasn't really at that point in the UK. And I think oddly, a lot of this had to do in the 20th century with the rise of a middle class, and suddenly people who had some disposable income and wanted to have a great meal on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night, and not have to get dressed up and not have to sit down for 4 hours for a tasting menu, but also with something a little bit more elevated. And he just nailed what it is to have a great time and have great food.
We have a really, what I feel is really stupid bias against British food. Every time I have somebody say, "Oh, British food, blah blah blah," and they roll their eyes, it makes me mad, because I remember when I was in England, I've never eaten better than when I've been in England. I ate very well there. And do you think that he kind of flings back, because his food is very British, and he really takes British food and elevates it? Do you think he's kind of flinging back to that, saying, "Well, oh yeah, well, take a load of this. This is pretty good." So
Yes, I think what he's doing is he is making British food with a French influence in technique, and he is using really great ingredients, but there's serious skill behind what he does. So I think there are a couple things in that. I think he first of all, he does believe in kind of robust fare, right? So it does feel much more like the food you might have in the British countryside rather than urban food.
yeah.
And I think that is incredibly comforting, and definitely harkens back to this idea of a kind of a more pastoral time when people were naturally in small villages and in the country living, farm to table, garden to table. And in fact that food was probably pretty good at times. And and then so many things happened, including really the ravages of World War II, which of course certainly in London lasted well into the 60s and 70s before the city really started to come back fully, I would say. I mean, I was not born, but that's what my research tells me. So I think he is definitely paying an ode or an homage to British food and also to French technique, and also to this idea that that if you use great local ingredients, you're going to have pretty sublime food if you treat it the right way, and you don't overcook it. So much about British food before this kind of culinary transformation had to do with the fact that things were just overcooked so much. Meat was overcooked and vegetables were overcooked and everything was kind of soggy and mushy and a kind of terrible mass. And so I love that he was saying, wait a second, if you take these basic concepts and you rethink how you make it and how you treat it and what food means, that food is not just calories, it's not just meant to feed, it's also meant to nourish at a different level. He really did do that.
When you're in, you spend a lot of your life in England and London. Are there any places that are must, if you're there for a week, are there any places you have to hit while you're there?
Oh, I have so many. I have a long list, and I would say that it also does change. And I have not tried everything since before the pandemic. So
Yeah.
when people ask me about restaurant suggestions now, I'm very careful to say these are places that historically have been fantastic. I have been to the River Cafe more recently. It is still one of my all-time favorite restaurants in the world. I love it. I love the look of it. I love the energy of it. It's a little bit off the beaten path in London. I also love, obviously, Yoda Motolenge's places. I love Nopi. I love going to Odolenge and just getting takeout. But then there's so many. There's some great Indian restaurants like Gymkhana, which I think is extraordinary as well. There's also incredibly good Spanish tapas, which is interesting. You wouldn't necessarily think of that, but places like Brindisa and Pizarro are absolutely fantastic. I love a place called Boca de Lupa, which is an Italian restaurant on Archer Street in Soho. Brilliant chef Jacob Kennedy, fantastic food. You can go in there, sit at the counter, and have a absolute sublime meal. And he's got a gelateria across the street too that's fantastic, called Chalupa. So those are there's so many. And I love, there's a great chocolate shop called Rococo, Marylebone, and is across the street from La Fromagerie, which I think is one of the great cheese shops, and also is a great place for lunch.
That sounds like a great day in London.
It's a great day in London. Exactly. You can have one thing and then just literally cross the 20-foot street and finish with a chocolate. So all good, and then maybe ice cream later. And I love coffee, but I am really a tea person also. So that part of the UK really appeals to me.
Now, I was going to ask, who are some of your favorite food writers that inspired you through your life?
Oh my gosh. I love Nigel Slater. I think I read Nigel Slater the way I read poetry, meaning that I will keep a book of his by my bed and just.
It makes sense.
Like I have memories of just reading a page of his on Blackberries. It's like, oh my gosh. So I really am a huge fan of Alec Lebrano, who wrote Hungry for Paris, which is more of a guidebook, but then last year he wrote a wonderful memoir called A Place at the Table.
Oh, yeah.
And he's just a beautiful writer, really beautiful writer. I'm actually going to do a talk with him at the Alliance Française I think in December. Lives in Paris, actually was at Gourmet for many years, and just has a gorgeous literary sensibility. I love Francis Lam. I think he's a fantastic writer, just a magician with words, and also just has a kind of voracious desire for culinary knowledge, which I love. So, there are a lot, but those are three who I kind of turn to again and again. And then going back, AJ Liebling, obviously huge influence, or I shouldn't say influence because that sounds very arrogant, but somebody I read a lot. Love M.F.K. Fisher. I love Elizabeth David. I grew up with, my mother had all of Elizabeth David's books. And I think there was something very liberating about this idea that you can have a recipe that's just a paragraph. And, especially the Mediterranean ones, if the ingredients are good, then you're going to end up with something delicious. I think she was very contemporary, very modern, in fact, in her own way.
Yeah, I think she was writing for food nerds back, ahead of time, way ahead of the curves before, we all started coming out of the woodwork now.
Listen, I mean, she kind of really brought some things like, olive oil and garlic to London, which isn't to say that people weren't aware of it. Of course they were, and of course they used them, but she really, really brought that Mediterranean influence in. And that was like just the arrival of sunshine in the UK for a lot of people,
So now that the book's coming out, Gateau, what's next for you after this?
Good question. I have 2 books I do want to write. And I've got this movie to finish, which is very fun. And
Very
I'm still
good.
in the Wall Street Journal column. But I also, in the last couple of years, I've started to consult really in the climate change and agriculture landscape. And, like every parent, I think it's impossible not to say I've got to work on making the planet okay for the next generation. So that has really been an interesting thing for me, because I do, I'm fascinated by learning new things, and I also feel like I have a different kind of perspective on how people eat in the world, and kind of what the shifting agricultural map looks like, and then who I think is really tackling food in the face of climate change in an interesting way. And so I've been focused on that, and kind of sitting on some boards and doing some consulting, and think I will probably do more of that. I'm particularly interested personally in kind of wine and climate change, tea and climate change, coffee and climate change. I spent some time this summer in Mozambique, in Gorongosa National Park, where there's this incredible sustainability drive, and they're making just beautiful shade-grown coffee, which has allowed them to reforest an entire mountain with indigenous trees. So things like that are just fascinating to me right now. So I'm definitely, I'm not going to stop writing. I'm going to keep writing cookbooks. I'm going to keep writing my column, but I also feel it's time to help the world a little bit.
Well, I mean, this is such an amazing time period for that, because so many people I've been talking to are really talking about that right now. And I think a lot of people are very concerned, and we still have, so many cities that are largely food deserts. And, I live in California. That's largely becoming a desert. I was talking to a representative from the Wheat Council of California, who's saying we're having to change the ways we grow wheat in California, which is, normal, but also a little terrifying. So this is a really heady time period.
It absolutely is. And I think that when you, when you have very specific specialties, what you miss is people saying, okay, well, yes, we can do things this way, or we can involve AI to help in this way. But unless people actually want to eat that way, or can figure out how to eat that way, or can envision it, then it's just not going to work, right? So I feel like some of these incredible tech organizations and funds and all of this stuff really do need somebody who says, yes, this is great, but if we're actually going to make this work, we actually have to A, see if people will eat this way, and B, teach them how.
Right. I look forward to that then. That's going to be wonderful.
Thank you.
Aleksandra, I really want to thank you for being on the show. I really had a great time talking to you. And I'm going to put links to your book. People can order it from the links online, and also your previous books as well, and your column on the Wall Street Journal. Aleksandra, thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, it was my total pleasure. I love talking to you.
That was my interview with the fun Aleksandra Crapanzano, who talked about her book, Gateau, The Surprising Simplicity of French Cakes. I really had a great time talking to Aleksandra, and I just really hope to have her on the program again. She was a really fun guest. Next week, we're going to be having Molly Gilbert on the program. I enjoyed talking to her as well, and I can't wait to air that for you also. She has a new book out also, Sheet Pan Sweets, Simple Streamlined Dessert Recipes. And boy, it's a great cookbook. I really recommend this one for you also. I've just been besieged with wonderful cookbooks lately, and I foresee a lot of baking over the next several weeks. So I'm going to be having a lot of fun. And I really encourage you to come and check out that one next week also. We want to encourage our listeners to please share our podcast links online on social media. Please tell a friend about our podcast. We always like having new listeners. We want to thank Asian Man Records for allowing us to use their song Talk About Love by the group Kitty Cat Fan Club that is on their label. You can check out asianmanrecords.com for that band and others and look at their merchandise as well, maybe buy an album or two. I hope you all have a really great week and keep on cooking.
I've been getting